Hello there, everyone. I am Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox, and you are watching episode number 61 of the Weekly Ratchet. This is a weekly variety board game themed show where I talk about me and you get to talk about you. So let's get to know each other just a little bit more here on the Weekly Ratchet. Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Weekly Ratchet. As always, I hope you've had a fantastic week of getting to play some games with family and or friends. I have gotten to do quite a bit of that here in the past few days, aided, of course, by the fact that this past weekend was Memorial Day here in the United States, which, of course, encompasses 90-something% of the audience of this show. So I hope that you got to enjoy the vacation holiday weekend and also get to sort of celebrate the meaning of that weekend, which hopefully we'll get to keep doing here in the U.S. But anyways, enough of all of that. Just a couple things here at the top of the show. I did finally get through that one editing project that was taking up an awful lot of effort. I got that finished just before the weekend, and then actually got another video prepped over the weekend as well. Both of those are going to the Dice Tower, and I'm just hoping that they will get through those fairly quickly. Sometimes it takes a while for me to get into their schedule, but I'm going to try and chase those because I want to get them out fairly quick. Up next is going to be the Deep Shelf game, which will be for this channel. Also the Beach Day game, which I'll talk about here in a few minutes. I've mentioned it a couple weeks ago, maybe a few months ago here in the channel, but we're going to get that video put together as well. So lots of things still coming. I did kind of mention, sort of tease last week that I might be going to Denmark. It looks like I will not be going to Denmark. Things are a bit crazy at work, so it looks like I won't be going, which I'm a little bummed by, but only because I found a board game shop and a board game cafe in the town of Aalborg that we were going to be going to, and now it looks like that might not be happening. But I don't think that was my only opportunity. So we'll see. We'll see. Anyways, lots to talk about here in this episode, and I'm excited to get into it, so let's do that right now. All right, real quick, just a couple of new games. One very, very exciting, one a little older. This is Modern Art, the card game, which I think is odd to call this because the original Modern Art was also mostly a card game. I mean, there's just a little bit of a board to kind of track values, if I remember. That's all there was. But anyways, my family and I actually got to play this, and so I'll talk about it here in just a little bit. But the other one is very big, very new, very exciting, very heavy Shackleton Base by Pandasaurus. Now, I actually didn't remember this. I might have known this, but my buddy Daniel reminded me that this is the same designer who made the game of Autobahn. That was with Alley Cat Games. This is from Pandasaurus. Autobahn was a neat game, but it was really marred by some just design issues, and I say that loosely because, like I said, it was a good game, but it didn't really have a good player aid. It didn't have a good way to sort of track where you were in your turn, and so it was very, very easy to just completely forget certain parts of your actions because of all this different stuff going on. It was a neat looking game. It was kind of a pick up and deliver with a lot of engine building. Only ever played it once, but we really had a good time with it. I'd love to play it again. I've already played this one, and I'll chat about this here in just a little bit. But those are the only two new games that came in. So let's go ahead and get to question of the week. All right, last week I asked you to tell me your thoughts on board games that are app-assisted or app-enabled. So these are games where specifically you are using an app, a web applet, something to drive the game. You're not able to play the game, at least in all of its capacity, without an app. There are some games that kind of use apps for maybe some voiceover work, some sound effects, maybe scoring, that kind of a thing, but they're not essential. And I was looking to talk about games specifically that are essential that you use this app. So up first is Mike Heller, who said he's a huge fan of app-enabled games like Return to Dark Tower, Destinies, and Chronicles of Crime. He said not every game should have it, but those that do have it use it to improve the game experience. Now, I know with Destinies and Chronicles of Crime, those are app mandatory. You have to use them. I didn't know about Dark Tower, but of course I also do know that Dark Tower has, literally moving mechanisms inside that tower. So I do believe that one is also app mandatory. So we'll talk a little bit more about those games as we kind of get through this list. Wonder Flonium said that app-enabled games allow for remote play or can add voice acting or sound effects, but that if it's just another way to interface with the game, he'd rather avoid the screen. So I can't think of any games that use apps to enable remote play. I think they all still require you to basically all be at the table. So I wonder if maybe there was a little, maybe a little bit of overlap there with board games that are apps. So, I mean, you can play Everdell on an app. You can play Spirit Island on an app. You don't need the physical game at all, but of course that's a separate purchase. You're buying that app to play that game online or with a virtual AI kind of whatever. But you're right, there are also ones that add some voice acting or sound effects, as I mentioned, so that you can sort of have and I know that ISS Vanguard is one of those where you can use the app to kind of read the story to you and add some actual voice actors. Gives you a little bit of that flair, and I especially like those for like co-op games where you don't if I'm just reading off of a booklet and I'm trying to do all the different voices. Stuffed Fables was a game like this, where I played it with my daughter, who was younger at the time, and I was trying to kind of voice act the different characters, and it was just weird. And so it's nice if you have an app that can do that, but again, it's also nice if it's not mandatory. If it can just sort of do that and then go away and we can sit and play the physical game. Teshra said the only app game they've been playing is Mind Management, but said that they generally avoid apps over fears that the app would disappear, as they tend to keep their favorite games for many years. And we're going to see this perspective, we're going to see this opinion a lot more as we kind of go through this. Rentless said he avoids app-enabled games, mentioning the same issue, apps that stop working. He said he uses gaming to connect with people and get away from his phone. Yeah, again, like I said, we're going to see a lot of this thought of, what happens when these apps kind of get abandoned, and I do agree. Like, if I'm getting people together to play a game, let's just leave the phones out of this completely. Jeremy Brooks mentioned a few app-enabled games he likes, mentioning Return to Dark Tower as his favorite, saying that he's okay with it as long as the majority of the gameplay is still happening on the table. And I've never played it, but I know the game of Descent. Shut Up and Sit Down even kind of did a review where they talked about the fact that the pieces on the table were almost unnecessary because so much of it was happening in the app that you really just kind of felt like you had to key everything in the app, and the app told you what to do on the table, so why was the table even there? And I kind of agree. If everything is handled by the app, then are you really playing a board game anymore? Ecto Fox said app-based games were fine with him, mentioning Mansions of Madness as his favorite. He said the app fixed problems with the original game, acting as a game master, which reduces the effort it takes to run the game. Now, I have not played Mansions of Madness. I'm not a Cthulhu person really in any way, shape, or form, so I'm not familiar with that one, but we're going to see that one also get mentioned here a couple times. Like, for example, from Katie of the Meeple Society, who said she used to hate app-assisted games, but has come to respect what the app can accomplish in games like My Father's Work or Search for Planet X. She said, however, that fear remains. What if the publisher abandons the app? And she also mentioned that they've recently acquired Mansions of Madness, which they are looking forward to checking out. The Awkward Meeple said they're not a huge fan of app-based games, but mentioned a few they have. They said the biggest fear is if the app is discontinued, adding, anyone remember Drop Mix? Yes. Yes, I do. I mentioned this actually several episodes ago. It was sometime last year. We did a math trade here in the Richmond area. This was up for trade. I don't remember. I don't know what I actually traded away for it, but I got it. I was excited to check it out until I came home and went to download the app. And it's not out there. There's just absolutely nothing. I did not actually realize that it was from the same company, Harmonix, which is a division of Hasbro, which also did like the Guitar Hero games. And they abandoned all that stuff as well. However, of course, if you have the discs, if you have the video games, you can still play what's on the video game, but you can't get the DLC anymore. I don't know if the DLC even still works, maybe unless you already had it downloaded on your console, which of course, all those consoles have been, rendered obsolete, new versions have come out, etc. So yeah, I found out that I couldn't use this at all. Now, there was a way to kind of hack the phone. I did manage to get the app downloaded. Thankfully, I have now replaced that phone, but I kept it. Not for this, for other reasons, but I should still be able to play this. The problem is, of course, now getting the upgrade packs and such are incredibly expensive because it has this cult following, because the app has been abandoned. So anyways, yeah, it's effectively dead. If you just go and get this and you don't have the means or methods to hack the phone, it's useless. It's completely useless. Moving on was Yukon Zach, who said they've been playing Freelancers, which requires an app, but the voices of the app change based on the characters you assemble for the game. He added when the app helps you learn the game and enhances the theme, he's all for it. Now, I'm aware of Freelancers. I didn't know that it was App Essential, or is it App Essential? I'm not actually sure myself. Those have been games I've been curious to check out. We also do have the very original of that sort of trilogy. I am blanking on the name. But anyways, I know it also has an app, but I wasn't sure if the app was required, so I have to look into that. Jason Brown, a first-time poster, said he enjoys Mansions of Madness and Return to Dark Tower. He said XCOM was a neat concept, and he liked Descent at first, but was over it fairly quickly. And I think that's just kind of it. And we'll see just a little bit more of this as we get through these last couple of entries, where some of these games just still don't really make it work, even with the app. Penny said she falls into the neutral category when it comes to app-assisted games. She said that some do it well and others leave a lot to be desired, naming some examples of each, and then added that she too worries about a game becoming useless if the app gets abandoned. And yeah, again, more of this, and I agree. Some of these really just aren't worth it in the long run. And then, of course, also you have games that have just been completely abandoned and you're left with a box of nothing. It's just decorations. Lastly, Spastic Geek, another first-time poster, said that they're okay with app-enabled games if it does something that improves the experience, rather than just being a hardline requirement. They mentioned Chronicles of Crime, which made progressing the game easier with the QR codes instead of flipping through a 1,000-page booklet, but that even then, it was still fiddly. They said ultimately, the value of it comes down to design. And I agree. And like I said, we've seen a lot of consistent themes here. So, I can think of some games that have apps that, does it really work? And Chronicles of Crime, I think, is a great example. I've played that. In fact, I noticed as I was prepping my notes for this yesterday that I still had the app on my phone, even though I got rid of the game a long time ago. Chronicles of Crime, for those who don't know, was this sort of detective crime-solving game where you were given sort of scenarios, you were given a couple of starting characters and locations. Actually, I think you were given all the locations and maybe just a couple of characters. And as you would actually scan QR codes. The original version just had QR codes. I think in later games from that same publisher, they kind of created their own symbology that sort of blended in with the game a little bit better, but still functioned as a QR code. And so you would scan a QR code and it would tell you to, okay, you're going to this location now. And maybe while you're there, you see these people, it would give you their sort of like a code, and you'd pull those cards out of your box, lay them out on that location, and then you could scan their QR codes to talk to them. You could maybe, while you're talking to a character, scan another character to basically effectively ask the person, what do you know about this person? The problem with it was, among several problems with that game, especially the earlier versions, was that it was all translated. The original authors, the publisher, the designer was maybe Polish, I don't really remember, but it was not native English. And so you read a lot of this dialogue and it didn't really make sense. And then also I found that with the fact that my wife and I used to watch a ton of crime drama. I mean, I've seen all of CSI and many other shows in that sort of genre. I found myself unable to do the things that I thought I should be able to do based on my, obviously, Hollywood experience with crime dramas. And so I wanted to be able to ask someone, where were you last night? Or where were you when this took you a place? Or have you ever been to this location? Well, you couldn't do that because if you scanned a person and then you scanned the location, it thought you were trying to go to that location and the app would tell you, no, you can't do this. I was like, well, no, I want to ask this person about this place. Couldn't do it. And there was no way, again, to say, well, where were you on this event? Like you couldn't sort of reference big picture things. You had to specifically ask about a place, about a person, or if you had some bit of evidence, you could ask them about this evidence. And so it just felt partial. It felt like it wasn't all there. It still didn't really give you the experience that you were sort of, it was a neat idea, but it just didn't really come through the way that I think a lot of folks expected it to be. There's also a game called, I think it's called Soho, or no, it's World of Yoho. I actually wrote it wrong here in my notes. World of Yoho is a game from Yellow where you had this large grid. I mean, it was a square, sort of almost like a spreadsheet looking kind of a thing. But the spaces were huge because they were actually meant to fit a smartphone. and you would download the app onto your phones, and then your phones were the ships in this sort of archipelago, sort of piratey adventure kind of a game. And as you moved your ship around, the motion sensors in the phone would detect which way you were moving it, and you would literally see the motion on the screen of your boat moving, and then you would have the ability on your turn. You had so many action points, if I remember. It's been a long time since I played this. And you could use your action points to attack or try and steal treasure, whatever. And as you shot at other ships, you would see the cannonballs leaving your ship on one screen and then entering your opponent's screen. Their phone was on the board as well, and you'd see the cannons coming in and hitting their ship. It was really, really cool, except that the game was really, really boring. There was so little that you could do. It was basically just moving and shooting. I think the combat still act as dice rolls, but the apps handled the dice rolls for you. So you just kind of like, you shot and hoped that you would hit, or hoped that you would do enough damage, whatever. But there was no story. There was no adventure. There were no missions. Like, there was nothing really that you were doing in the grand scheme of things. And it just felt like, hey, we had this idea, let's see if we can pull it off. Oh, hey, we did, ship it. Don't build anything, don't improve anything. There were no expansions. You can actually still get the app, surprisingly enough, but there's nothing to it. It's completely, and now that our phones have gotten so big, they don't fit on the boards anymore. My phone takes up like 1.5 spaces on this map, and so it just, your side-by-side combat wouldn't work because your phones are laying over top. Anyways, I'm also thinking of the game First Martians. That was one of the first games I ever knew about that had an app. I think that was from Ignacy Trzewiczek, if I recall, the same designer of, what's the island exploration survival game? I'm blanking on it. Everyone's yelling at their phones right now, and I can hear you, but I can't remember what it's called. But it was, about sort of, I think, colonizing the moon, or maybe Mars. No, Mars. First Martians. And again, everything was driven by an app. The app was telling you what things were happening. But like, if you bumped a button too quickly, or maybe you just hit the wrong button, there was no back button. There was no undo. There was no save your progress and come back to it later, because it was a long game. If your phone timed out long enough, you actually couldn't always jump back. At least initially, you couldn't pick up where you left off. And so everything just didn't work. And I think the whole problem with these things, and maybe what a lot of people maybe don't consider, don't know, don't think about, is that developing an app and keeping an app out there is far more than just, okay, I made this, it's on the store, I'm done. You have to constantly maintain it. You have to constantly update it for new operating systems, for new phones, new devices. Technologies are slightly different, and the operating systems are slightly different all over the globe. Security measures are different in different countries. Just all kinds of that stuff to consider. If you make a game, you sell a few thousand copies of it, and then the game kind of just flatlines, you're not making any more money off that game, but you still have to spend the money to keep that app in progress. And so, yes, we have seen plenty of times, like Drop Mix, and there's another really, really big kind of a monster dungeon crawling game I cannot remember the name of. The same thing. The app just said, look, we're done. We're not updating it. It's coming off the store. Enjoy your box of plastic, because that's all you have now. And as someone who has at least one of those, granted, admittedly, I didn't pay a lot of money for it, but it's a huge disappointment to folks to have this happen, and all of a sudden you're left with nothing. And so, kind of as Teshra said, is that a risk you really want to take? Do you want to go and buy these big ambitious projects, and then they tank, and then you can't sell it? You can never recoup your money. You probably haven't played it enough to get your money's worth out of it. So what do you do? Anyways, it's a very, very interesting topic, and I will say that in general, I kind of avoid app games now. I was actually the opposite of my friend Katie. When they first came out, I thought, this is the coolest thing ever. This is the pinnacle of gaming. The world is changing. It's going to be amazing. And now I'm kind of like, maybe I'll just stick to the board games. I don't think they're bad. I don't like shun them. I don't boycott them, that kind of thing. But I just, if I can play it, okay, I'll play it. But I'm probably not going to buy it. We've seen some where it's like a web applet. And we've also, one thing I didn't mention was the game of Alchemists by CGE. It's app enabled in that you're mixing these chemicals, you're making potions with these different, sort of witchcraft type ingredients. But if you ever don't have access to the app, there's like a board that you can use, and someone can set it up. And then when you sort of pass your ingredients over, they can tell you, okay, well, that makes this. And so they can actually set up that variability of the game. But then you've got to ask someone to sit with you while you play the game. They don't play the game. They're just kind of acting as the app. They may do something every couple of minutes. I see that being a very tough sell. It's a neat idea, and I remember when that came out, I was like, well, that's pretty smart. That way, if the app goes belly up, you can still always play the game if you can get someone to be your proxy for the 2 hours it takes to play that. I don't know. I see that being a tough sell. Anyways, that is the question of the week. Especially appreciate some of our first-time posters, and I hope that we're going to see more first-time posters. It's always great to see new people commenting, and I hope that you folks will come back. So let's go ahead and move on to some recently played games. All right, here we go with some recently played games. I have quite a lot of them. Some of these you have heard about before, and I'm going to try and get through these quickly. But again, over the holiday weekend, I did get to play a bunch of stuff. Now, first of all, early last week, my wife and I did sit down to another game of From the Moon. She had not tried this one before. I thought she would kind of like this one as she liked Everdell, which uses some similar ideas in that you are playing out these workers. Usually those workers will give you resources or let you take actions, but then also between placement of those workers, you have a number of other actions that you can take, whether you're building buildings, working on research projects, maybe training new astronauts to put into those rovers, which are your workers. And so when you put a rover out, you might be able to trigger multiple actions based on the astronauts that you have in that rover. And of course, it does have some various endgame goals that you're working towards. There are these missions in play on the table that you're able to trigger by spending resources that you've gathered throughout the game to sort of complete portions of those projects. When all the portions of a project get completed, that ship launches, and there's some intermediate scoring. And I was kind of correct. She kind of liked it. She definitely at a couple times was like, I just don't know what I'm doing. And I said, yeah, your actions aren't always intuitive. And for one thing, you sort of know that there are things to do, right? Like I know there are these missions I want to work on. I want to try and get these resources. But I'm also trying to build these buildings which need resources. I'm trying to, get astronauts that need resources. I want these research projects which generate resources but cost resources to get. And I'm still not even sure if they're really efficiently ironed out. I don't know that resource thing really makes sense. But so you kind of know what you want to work on, but there are so many things that you want to work on that it becomes overwhelming. And the other problem is that when you're putting these rovers out on these tiles, there's only a couple things there's only one thing actually that each tile lets you do. You only get to trigger that tile's action once, and you can gather resources, but if there aren't that many resources on that tile, then it feels like a waste to go there. And so even later on in the game, when you've built up all these astronauts, you have specialized astronauts, you have a diverse group in each of your rovers, possibly, you almost feel like it's become a waste because now you can't do that much. Those tiles aren't always abundant in opportunities for your workers, and so they just feel like a waste sometimes to put out. Now, we did kind of custom tailor this. I've mentioned in the past that, one player kind of picks the buildings that will be in the game for all players. You each have your own set, but you're always working with an identical set. And I kind of made sure that we tailored that set of buildings to ones that were most useful as far as gaining income between your rounds, to sort of keep yourself in a forward-moving direction, because otherwise the game just felt very stagnant the last time we played because it was so hard to get resources. What I'll just mention real quick about this, the part that I think is kind of interesting is that, in games like Everdell, and hopefully enough folks are familiar with that game, and that you're placing out your workers, you're getting resources, you're using those resources to play cards. Sometimes the cards have actions, but usually you still need a worker to trigger them. And of course, if you're playing a card, you get to trigger it. But eventually you run out of resources, you run out of workers, and you have to kind of do a reset. You get all your workers back, maybe an extra worker, and you go into the next season. And people can be in different seasons. You can be a little ahead of someone, which typically means they're being more efficient. They're getting more out of their actions, and they're able to keep going with what they've already had, whereas you have already reset and you're moving into your next season. Maybe that doesn't mean you're being inefficient. Maybe you made some really, really big play that cost you a lot of stuff, but maybe gave you a bunch of points, maybe gave you some good forward momentum into that next round. That's all fine. But eventually you may run into a point where you are just done. You've done all of your seasons. You've gone all the way through, I think it's winter. You're out of workers. You're out of resources. I'm done. There's nothing else I can do. My game is over. And I may have to sit for 20 minutes and wait for someone across the table who has been far more efficient to just keep playing. Well, I still get to do this. I get, all of a sudden they're just turn after turn after turn. There's no one else that they're waiting for, which is the most fun part of the game. Let's say if you were that player, which I have been from time to time. And you're just sitting there waiting, and you're watching them play all these cards and probably rack up all these points and doing all this stuff, and you're going, wow, I am just watching myself lose this game. This one has that same pacing in that, okay, I've used up all my workers, I've used up all my resources, there's nothing else I can do, I'm going to do an income step, and I move at this little track, and I may be further ahead on that track than someone else because I've had to do that more often. But if I would ever slide off of that track, if I ever need to do a refresh and I'm already at the end of that track, I trigger the end game. And that's really kind of interesting because the other players felt like, well, geez, man, this guy sucks because he's constantly just taking his income step. But oh shit, he's going to end the game with us. So maybe we're playing efficiently, but we might still be balanced in score. Even though if we got to keep playing, if we got to catch up eventually, we would want the snot out of that player, but we don't get that opportunity. And so it's just really interesting. My fear with the game, honestly, though, is that the corporations, this asymmetrical idea that's in here, these different corporations, you get like a unique bonus action. Maybe I get to do something extra when I do a certain action. The corporation I played last time did not feel useful to me at all. I never built their custom building. That uniqueness isn't always interesting, and I kind of feel like I've already seen most of what this game has to offer. Like I've said, when you get to the end of it, you've got these really nice built-out workers. You're mostly going to waste their abilities anyways. The buildings that you get to build aren't really that interesting. The endgame scoring seems weird in that there's these achievements that you're gaining through doing various things. I won't go into that, but the person with the most achievements gets 24 points at the end of the game, and that can really seem like a big swing. So I don't know. I like the game, but I just don't really know. I've played it with my good buddy Daniel and some other friends. I played it with my wife. If I get a chance, I was going to check out the solo experience, but I just don't know that there is a lot more that this box has to offer me. That is From the Moon from Boîte de Jeu. All right, up next, we got into the holiday weekend, and my wife said, hey, let's just play something, and I broke out 10 Penny Parks. I cannot believe I have not talked about this game on this show, 61 episodes in. Never talked about one of my favorite games, 10 Penny Parks, where you are making an amusement park. And this is a combination of a sort of polyomino placement, worker placement game. You've got a board in front of you that represents just a plot of land, and there's a bunch of wooden trees on it that kind of block, the path of that land. You've also got some icons, and none of my pictures that I get pictures of the icons, but you have these icons out, which if you ever cover them, you just get a quick little immediate bonus. There are 3 tracks at the bottom of the main board. I'll come back to those. And then there are a number of worker placement locations. So one, you just get $2. The other one, you get to buy an extension to your land for $3, if I recall. The one lets you cut down some trees. It costs you just a couple dollars. No, I think it's free. And you get to just remove a couple of those tree tokens from your board. And then there's one that lets you get these little concession stands. And these are just little 1x1 tiles that go onto your board. And they may give you some advancement on those tracks, but they may also give you income into your future turns. And then mostly, the majority of the actions you'll be taking are around this carousel wheel in the middle of the board that sort of point to these 6 locations where you are buying these attraction cards. And each of these attractions are grouped into themes. You've got Wild Wild West, you've got aquatics, you've got space, and you've got a couple others that I cannot remember. I think there's like maybe a jungle animal theme, and I cannot remember what all of them are. Also, one of them is based on essentially concessions. So you can get a food stand, you can get some souvenir shops, and those specifically will generate income for you into the next round. As you're buying all these things, the concessions, the concession stands, the shops and such, and then of course these amusements, these attractions, they go onto your board in polyomino little tiles. But in one of the biggest twists I've ever seen in a polyomino game, next to Blockus itself, these tiles can never touch each other. They can share a corner, but that's as close as they can get. So one edge of a tile can never share an edge with another tile. And that means that you are constantly trying to very carefully place these things among these trees. You're trying to make sure that you're placing them in ways where obviously they're not touching each other, but they're still going to let you cover some of those symbols. They may help you get up these tracks. Now, these tracks I've mentioned, there's 3 of them. There's excitement, there's joy, and I don't remember what the other one is. Maybe just thrill. It might be thrill. And you're climbing up these tracks. Some of the amusements that you buy will give you those symbols. Some of the concessions that you buy will give you these symbols. And whoever is at the top of each of these tracks at the end of each round gets a bonus. So the one track lets you be first player. The other track just gives you $3. The other track gives you an extra worker, and there's only 3 workers per player per round. You never get more of them except this one bonus worker. And to be able to take those benefits, you have to notch yourself down 1 space on that track. If you're playing with more than 3 players, the second place also gets a small bonus. I think it's just a point. And you can forego your bonus to just take a point instead, but then someone else might get that bonus, as obviously you always have to have a first player. Anyways, I love this game. I love this game very much. Of all the amusement park games that I have played, this one feels the most thematic. I love the idea that you literally have this top-down map. You're putting these attractions out there. It feels a lot like a roller coaster tycoon type idea, where again, you can just kind of stand back and see your park, as opposed to games like Wishland, where you're literally just playing out slews of cards and moving up tracks and that kind of a thing. This game, you get to see it physically on the table. I also really love the idea that these amusements that you place out, each one, except for the concession stands, gives you an advertising bonus. And so at the end of each round, before you collect income, and that's important, you get to spend any residual money that you have, if you want to advertise your rides, which just gives you victory points. And so again, there's this idea of, well, hey, look, I can go ahead and buy that big amusement and maybe bump up these tracks, but I'm not going to have money to advertise, which is not going to give me the points I need to actually win this game. So anyways, my wife and I played this. Now I'll say that she got a little flustered because, well, for one thing, I kept getting the extra worker, and I always go for that extra worker. It kind of makes sense in a worker placement game if I can have 25% more actions than anyone else at the table. But I also had a goal card to be at the top of that track, so I was intentionally pushing myself up that track to get that goal, but also to get that worker. And then, of course, if you get to a certain spot on each track by the end of the game, you get an extra 5 points. So that kind of hampered her. And I told her, I was like, yeah, you really need to be trying to fight me on that track. But I was also fighting to stay ahead on that track for all those reasons. And so I did have a kind of a high score coming out of this, and it kind of flustered her a little bit, but it's just such a fun game. And I know that feeling. I've been beaten at this, and it's one of those games that, man, I just love it so much that when you lose, it's like, oh, damn, I love this game. Anyways, 10 Penny Parks, that's by Thunderworks. Oh, and I did see as I was logging my play on Board Game Geek that they are working on an expansion. I've heard about this for years. It looks like it is finally in some development. I'm going to try and reach out to them and see if I can get a review copy, because I just love that game. All right, up next, that same day, we went out to Center in the Universe Brewing Company. We spent a ton of money on some lobster rolls from a Cousin's Maine lobster food truck. A very, very delicious way to drop $100 on some food. But anyways, we took a couple games with us. I'm actually going to put both of these out. The first one was Beach Day. Beach Day is just one of those card placement games. You're sort of building a tableau in front of you. Each of these cards is divided into quadrants, and you've got symbols on each card. And you've got these different scoring criteria for each of those symbols. So if you've got sand castles, there's these little tokens of, it's supposed to be water. It looks like a green trash bag. I'm not sure why they made that choice. But if you're trying to get water around that sandcastle in various patterns, you've got beach balls, which you're usually just going to get points for who has the most beach balls, or maybe most in rows and columns, something like that. There are different shells. They're just trying to get the largest grouping of each of these 3 shells. You've got trash, which is a negative point, and you've got sand dollars, which are a positive point, and so on and so forth. And so as you're drafting these cards, you're putting them out in front of you. You can stack them on top of each other. You can cover each other's symbols, except for your turtle. You always have to keep your turtle visible, which is on your starting card. And at the end, like I said, each of these different visual features score in different ways depending on which cards you draw from this scoring deck. Very, very simple. And it's fun. The only thing I will say is that there are these crab cards that you get. Yes, crab. And they give you unique scoring opportunities. You get to pick one of them to go into the game with. And at the very end, like, all these things are based on having more of something than someone else. And so in our very last game, our very last round, I was trying to have the largest group of open spaces around my turtle. I got very, very few cards with open spaces. And at the very, very last round, my daughter took a card that I was going to draft, and she played it next to her turtle, and I don't even think she was going for scoring. I think she was like, I don't know what to do with this. But in the process, she outscored me on the turtle, which was my goal, was to have the highest scoring turtle. And so I lost a ton of points going into that, just on pure dumb random luck. But my daughter won the game, and so we were really excited for her for winning the game. I think it's a very cute game. It's a very nice little pub game. And this is coming to Kickstarter at some point. They have delayed this project 3 times or so at least. Hopefully they'll get it going, but that is Beach Day. Up next, we played the Modern Art card game. Now, real quick, the original Modern Art was a auction bidding game. I'm not a huge fan of auction bidding games, but I did like it because the whole idea is that you're trying to have the most art cards in front of you of the most popular artist. But the popularity of the artist is simply based on how many of those cards get revealed in a round. Everybody has a hand of cards, and of course you have no idea what cards they have. You also don't know which cards they're going to play. You don't necessarily play all of the cards in each game. And so you're playing out these cards, you're taking turns bidding on these cards. Each card has its own way of being bid on. There's actually symbols on the cards that tell you how you have to bid for it. And the, sorry, there's a car in my driveway. Be right back. Okay, sorry about that. Either I got a new game or some organizers I ordered for closets. Anyways, more on that later. So as I was saying, in the original game, you're bidding on these cards. The more of them that are out makes each artist worth more money. And so if you have more of a certain artist's card on the table after each round, then their value goes up and you'll get money based on every one of those cards you have acquired through that bidding process. If, of course, you've managed to buy cards, actually, I say managed, if you have happened to buy cards of the artist that isn't in that top 3, well, then those cards are completely worthless and you've wasted your money buying them. And I always thought that was interesting. It was just a really, really neat idea. I had no idea what was different with this card game version, and the simple answer to that is that there is no money. There is no actual value assigned to the cards. You're just getting points, and you're tracking those points on a little score sheet. You've got a number of cards again for each artist, and each artist has a different number of cards in this overall deck. And you're playing a card. Some of those cards, on your turn, you just play a card. And if the card has a special effect, you get to trigger it. And so one card may say, okay, we'll play another card from that same artist. Or play another card face down. No one will know what it is. Or add 2 points to the value of the artist of this card. But a lot of them are also blank. So you might just play a card and nothing happens next player's turn. You play that until there are a number of cards of one artist of a certain value. So if you have at least 6 cards in a 3-player game of the same artist, that immediately triggers the end of the round. You see who is the first, second, and third most populous artist on the table. You assign those values stack. So if the artist was the most popular in the last round, you put a 3 on them, that's 3 points. If they're also the most popular in this round, they get another 3 points. If you played the 2-point bonus at some point during the game, then that means that at that point, that artist is worth 8 points per card. And so you would score for every artist you have of that card, 8 points each, track it on your score sheet, go to the next round, play 4 rounds, game is over. And again, very, very simple. A little bit more based on the luck of the draw, because of course with the auctioning, you can kind of go, look, I don't think there's any value in this artist. I'm not going to bid on it. Or maybe I'm going to try and bid low, or maybe I'm going to try and get a little sneaky. And I like that. With this, it's just, okay, well, gosh, I see that artist is really popular. I don't have any of their cards, so I can't play any of their cards, which means I cannot kind of get in on the value of that artist, which is a bit unfortunate. Maybe you could try and real quickly play a bunch of cards of another artist. If you have a whole bunch of another artist, you can try and quickly get them out to make them more popular, maybe helping yourself out, but you just don't know. I did like this idea of being able to play cards face down. So maybe I did see that there was an artist that had a lot of cards out. Maybe I could kind of get in on it without triggering the end of the round, because they don't count towards that limit, which is kind of neat. But anyways, certainly fine game. Less options overall, sort of less strategy to it overall. The thing that was really funny was that in just the second round of it, I was really trying to make sure my daughter had help. Like, this is not her kind of a game. She couldn't care less. So I was trying to kind of coach her, like, hey, maybe you don't want to play this yet because you're going to trigger the end of the round. And, for example, all these other cards you have in front of you, they're not worth anything. So maybe hold back, maybe try and get him played face down so you can still get in on it, but not, whatever. And my daughter goes, yeah, okay, yeah, I don't like this game. And I was like, I get it. Just get through it. Well, she won. Maybe again, some luck of the draw, but she won. And did a pretty good job, and we were all just kind of surprised. Anyways, I like this. I had fun with it. Again, another pretty good pub game. The only problem with this was that the cards just aren't. I think it's all real artists' work, but it's not the neatest looking art from our perspective, at least. And there were also a couple cards where the card was red, but they had the yellow artist stripe at the bottom, and you kept looking at it and thinking it was the red artist when it was actually the yellow artist. And it's like, why did you do that when you made the game? Like, you should make the pictures, the colors at least somewhat consistent with the color stripe you've assigned to that artist. It would just make it easier for everyone to work with. Anyways, that was Modern Art, the card game. Okay, that was it for that night. This is the one you've all been waiting to hear about, I hope. Maybe possibly the next morning, my wife and I sat down to Shackleton Base. Again, this is from Pandasaurus. In the artist's name, I mentioned his lineup, but this is Fabio Lapiano, artist by David Sitbun. This is about sort of building up a base and building up a presence in the Shackleton crater on the moon. And I don't know exactly where that is on the moon, I'll be honest, but it is a place, it is a named location on the moon. And what you're doing is you are building these various domes, labs, workshops, and headquarters in your player color on the moon. It's arranged in this sort of hexagonal grid. And there are also 3 corporations that are sort of vying for their own presence on the moon. And so as you're doing things, as you're building out these buildings, you can sort of help to further the cause of these corporations by putting out their little tags. And then you get to interact with these corporations through some specific actions. For example, we used the starting setup, so there was a corporation, I can't remember their names, but there was one that brought tourists out. And you could acquire these tourists and put them on your base, on your player board, but they kind of just blocked up spaces on that board until you could possibly get them onto these project cards that also belong to that corporation, where they could score you extra points or extra resources or extra reputation, etc. There were then 2 other corporations, again, the starting ones that it recommends, that were really just about collecting resources and then spending those resources to get other resources. Just a very simple conversion. And so you were collecting maybe helium-3, you were collecting rare earth, and using those to fulfill orders with the one corporation. And then the other corporation had their own minerals that they were kind of putting out. You could collect them and use them to fulfill a sort of complete science projects, I think was the idea. But again, you're just trading in these resources to get other resources out, maybe points, maybe reputation. Some of them even let you trigger extra actions as it got later in the game. That was pretty interesting. And the whole thing is done with this worker placement idea in that at the beginning of each round, you're drafting these little space shuttles. Each space shuttle gives you a couple resources, but then also astronauts of these different colors, red, yellow, blue. And depending on what you do with those astronauts dictates which action you get to take in that turn. But you can either put them on the crater. You can sort of align them with a row, one of the rows of these hexagons across the board, and you could either get money, you could get resources from the surface of the board itself, from the surface, from that crater, or you could trigger some of those corporation actions, or you could go to a different part of the board, which would let you build buildings out onto the crater, or let you work on the projects of those corporations, or again trigger off these corporation actions. And some of them were based on your reputation level, some of them were based on actions on the bottom of the corporation board, etc. And there's a lot more I could explain. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. But we started off, I kind of taught my wife the game. We had watched a video on it. The rulebook is okay, but there are a ton of fringe cases that just get left out. There are tons of things that just don't get... It's not that they don't answer the questions. Well, it is. But it's not that they tell you things wrong or they just don't tell you what to do, but they don't sort of cover some of the questions that are going to come up in gameplay. So, for example, I got a couple of tourists very early in the game, and you're supposed to put them on your board. I read, okay, you put them on your board. Okay, well, what do? Do they act as a wild resource? Do they let me trigger the abilities of those buildings? Because once you put the buildings out on the map, you open up those spaces on your board, and now those are places to park astronauts as if they're working in those buildings. But if they're not the right color, if they're not the right type, then they don't do anything. So I wasn't sure if these tourists act as any of those astronauts or no. The answer apparently is no. They just clog up space on your board until you can get them onto these project cards if you get the project cards, which made me realize too late that I should not have done that because they were just taking up space. But so like I said, we watched the video. I taught my wife the game, and it's a heavy teach. It's just a lot to do. And we literally sat there and it was, okay, my first turn, I have no idea. I have no idea what to work towards. Yeah, I want to try and get buildings built. I know that. I don't really know why. I eventually figured it out. But the corporation's like, what do they really do? Why do I really care about their actions? I'm sure I can go and get resources, but what do I need them for? It was like understanding the whole puzzle and the process of, okay, I'm getting stuff, to spend stuff, to build stuff, to do stuff, but what, why, when, where? I could kind of see that each corporation has their own goal. The one was to have a bunch of projects completed for that corporation, so I kind of set myself that goal. We also got a ways into it before I realized, oh crap, I built a lab and I never took the lab's action. Oh crap, I finished all these projects and each one was supposed to give me resources. I didn't even know what that icon was for. It's just kind of like a quick little sentence in the rule book. Immediately get yourself that bonus. What bonus? Oh, that's what the icon is in the corner of the card. So we struggled with this. We did get through it. Like I said, I had a lot of questions. I posted them out on Board Game Geek. I did get answers, thankfully. It was also a very, very tight game. My wife, actually, I felt like she was clobbering me for the longest time, because every time I looked over at her, she had a ton of these resources she was collecting. We were kind of on par with buildings. She had built all of her workshops. I'd only built 2 of them. I did get 2 of my labs out. She only got 1 of those out. None of us got the workshop. We were nowhere close to getting that many resources. So it was a challenging game. I wish the rule book was a little bit better. I wish I'd kind of gone into it with a little bit of an understanding of how things worked. So I definitely want to play this again. I might get a chance actually this evening. We'll see. But I thought it was interesting. I'm interested to explore some of these other corporations. They kind of create a difference in the game. There is no real asymmetry at the get-go, but the corporations will make each play of the game different, and how they synergize with each other could be kind of interesting. I don't think they always do. I think, for example, my wife and I each individually just completely ignored one of the corporations. I ignored the middle one with the science experiments, and she ignored the tourist board, and yet we ended up 2 points within each other, which I did think was pretty interesting. Maybe that means there's a good balance there. I don't know, and I won't say for sure. But anyways, I definitely need to visit this a good bit more now that I have a little bit of an understanding as to what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it. I will say that if you're if you're getting into this game for the first time, building yourself along a solid row of that crater, having a building in each of those spaces is very, very key, because my wife did that very early. I did not. I was kind of focused on some of these projects and trying to get those things completed, and she could plop down an astronaut on that board and get 4 resources or $12, and I could not do that. I had no way to sort of keep up with that. And so a couple times I was like, I literally just cannot do anything. I have to almost just waste an action to just put an astronaut on my board, which I can't really utilize. And so I definitely lagged behind. That was one of the reasons why I struggled so hard to get resources. I also didn't realize that I was supposed to get resources for completing those projects. So there actually was a bit of a balance there that I wasn't realizing. I realized that way too late in the game. So that would have changed things for me to have those things early on. That's a rule book thing, a learning game. Again, it's fine. I'm not like upset about it. I just kind of wish it was a little bit more clear. Maybe some extra iconography on the board to kind of help coach you through that. Anyways, a neat game, and I can't really give a better verdict than that right now, but I am looking forward to checking this out a bit more. I'm also looking forward to blinging this one out. If it does kind of look like it's going to stick around, could really use some improvement in the components. Anyways, that is Shackleton Base, and a very, very heavy box. All right, just a few more here. So that evening, my wife and daughter went off to a concert, and I decided to let them go and have some fun with some of my wife's friends. And I played a solo game of Mistborn. This is a John DeClair deck building game. I've talked about this a couple weeks ago here, maybe even last episode on the channel. I think it was 2 episodes ago. But anyways, it is a deck building game, and you're playing these cards. But in order to activate the effects on these cards, you have to burn metals. Now, this is based on the Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series of novels. I have not read them. I don't know anything about them. So the theme kind of doesn't land with me, but I do still like this idea of, having to sort of trigger the ability on these cards more than just having the cards, right? But early in the game, you can only burn 1 metal. You can flare a metal as many times as you want, but once you flare them, they're kind of locked out of play until you discard a card of the appropriate type to refresh that metal. Now, in the solo game, and it can also be played co-op, which I really want to explore, you get this deck of cards. Now, I mentioned in the previous game, or my previous sort of comment on this, that there are 2 different types of games that you get. You get just the action cards, and then you get ally cards. And the ally cards kind of sit out there. They may give you some additional benefits if you burn the appropriate metal. You can even use a metal to trigger an action card, which will then inherently trigger your ally, and that's pretty nice. The AI deck, the enemy deck, does the same thing. So you get this sort of Lord something or other. Again, it's in the theme. I don't know what it is. I apologize. But this card comes out, and there's a dominance level. I believe it's called Dominance or Doomsday, whichever it is. And it starts at 1. And you're going to draw cards from his deck at the end of each one of your turns. And he may get bad guys that sit in front of you, or he may get these edict cards, and edict cards trigger top to bottom, and then they get discarded right away. And a lot of times those edict cards will bump up the dominance level. And at first nothing happens, but eventually they start to smack you, and you're taking damage. Maybe you're having to kill allies. You're mostly taking damage. These enemy cards that will come out and attach to a player, and of course, if you're the solo player, they all come to you. They'll also have negative effects. They may damage you. They may prevent you from sort of training throughout the game. They may prevent you from working on the missions, etc. And they have shield values. You have to just keep plucking away at their shields until they die and go away and get discarded. When those edict cards come out, I know I'm kind of jumping around, but when those edict cards come out, they will heal the bad guy based on how many of your missions you haven't completed. And so I kind of thought, hey, I just need to build a big damage deck and take this guy out. Well, until he healed 30 damage, which I didn't hurt him that much, but I had done like 10 damage, and he basically got to heal 30. Oh, crap, I need to work on these missions. So I had to kind of change my process very early in the game, and start working on the missions first, then focus on damage. Of course, you needed to have damage as well to keep taking out these bad guys who attach to you. So luckily, I had that already in the bag when I got the missions done. And you're just trying to, of course, stay alive, get the missions done, keep fighting the bad guys, and eventually chip away at the main guy's health, all before he maxes out his dominance track. And I did it. It was touch and go there for a moment, but I did it, and I really enjoyed the experience. I actually sat outside and just enjoyed a nice, beautiful kind of overcast evening playing this game. And I've talked about the Unstoppable game, also by John DeClair. And I tell you, even though I don't know the theme of this game, I still really appreciate the setting and the world and what theme I can just glean from it far more than Unstoppable, which I just did not feel like had really any theme. Everything's just kind of, it's not fantasy. I don't really know what Unstoppable is. I know this is fantasy, and I still just like it so much more than Unstoppable that I think that game is going to go away, and I really enjoyed this solo experience. So that is Mistborn, a solo game. And then the last one that I got to play, actually last 2 that I got to play, I went over to my buddy's house, Mike, over the weekend. We played another game of Beyond the Horizon. I actually forgot to grab the box, but we played Beyond the Horizon. This is the sequel to Beyond the Sun. And I talked about this one at good length a couple of episodes ago, and I'm not really going to get into it too much. Everyone kind of had the same experience that I did. First of all, the components of this are just poor. You're putting these tiny fiddly little discs on top of these little wooden goblets, and they kind of represent your explorers or your soldiers across this map. The map is kind of neat. I like the idea of the map. We ran out of map tiles long before we ran out of game to play, and we still had this issue, and I started to feel it a lot more in this playthrough. We played it at 3. I started to feel the issue in that a lot of these technology cards that come out on the table are useless. There are several cards out there that no one ever used throughout the entire game. They just kind of become stepping stones to get to the next technology, which hopefully is more useful. And that was kind of a big bummer. It also was weird in that one player was just slaughtering us early in the game. He was way ahead on all the technology, always had a ton of resources, was making a lot of upgrades, but he literally ran out of things to do before he could trigger any kind of endgame. It still took him forever to even get the 2 achievements that he did. There's a third achievement that was so difficult, no one ever got it. And that gave plenty of time for my friend Mike and I to kind of catch up to him. Eventually, I triggered a couple achievements. I triggered the end of the game. And in fact, I did it probably 1 turn earlier than I needed to. Mike and I tied at 97 points, and his friend Nathan had 98 points. So for all of his early lead, he just ran out of steam, and we were able to catch up. And obviously got very, very close. It was more of a photo finish than I've ever seen in a board game. And that was pretty neat, but that was beyond the horizon. Again, I think the components of this game hold it back. I think that the cards and sort of what it tries to do doesn't quite get there. I don't know that I like Beyond the Sun more or less than Beyond the Horizon. I definitely can't see a reason to have both. But anyways, that was Beyond Horizon. The last game we played was Alhambra. I have never played this one before, despite it being a Spiel des Jahres winner. And this is a game we were trying to build a walled city in, I think it said Granada, if I remember. That might be wrong. I apologize. But you're trying to buy these city tiles from this board, and each tile sits in a space of a different currency. So you have 4 different currencies, and I believe they are real currencies, but I don't remember what they all were, kind of in this Middle Eastern, setting. And so you're either, on your turn, you're either drawing a currency card or using your currency to buy a tile, or possibly swapping tiles out from a kind of a reserve that you can stash things and trying to get them out into your city. Some of these tiles have walls on the edges, and so what you're trying to do is you got to make sure that you always, every tile that you place has to be able to get to the sort of main palace in the center, but you're also trying to build a nice long continuous wall. You're also trying to get set collection, so each of these tiles has its own color, and when a card gets revealed from the currency deck that triggers a scoring round, you're going to basically see who has the most reds, blues, whites, green, black, and purple, if I remember it. It's not in the right order, I know that much, and then each round, each of those colors becomes worth more points. And first of all, first you only get a first player lead, and then the second scoring, your top 2 players get some points, and the final scoring, your top 3 players get some points. I think it plays to 5 or 6. This was okay. I did, in general, enjoy the play, but there's also this element that if you're able to spend the exact amount of money on the tile, so the tiles have a value on them, but again, it's where that tile sits on the market board that determines which currency you need to pay. So if you have a blue tile sitting on the green space, then you have to spend green money on the blue tile equal to the number on the blue tile. And that was also a bit of a throw off because blue was one of the currency types, and blue was one of the set collection types of tile. And so at least early in the game, I was like, okay, I got to spend 9 blue. Oh, no, it's on the green space, so I need 9 green to buy the blue tile. And that threw me off for a bit, but it was okay. But if you had exactly that $9 in the green currency, you bought the tile and you immediately got to take another turn. Now, the market didn't refresh and the money didn't refresh, but you could just kind of keep going until you ran out of things to do. And there was one turn that I got to buy, I think, 2 or 3 tiles, and I had exactly the right amount of money, so I got to just steamroll the whole board. And that felt great, but that was the only time I got to do it. I rarely ever had just the right amount of money, and my opponents often did. And so it was often frustrating when you're going, okay, I really need that tile, and then someone just suddenly cleans the whole board, and you go, okay, well, Now I got to wait for my next opportunity. Or there was a tile out there that I really needed in my board. I didn't have any of that money and there was none of it in the market. And so again, it really just felt like it came down to luck. Now I will say that at the end of the game, Mike had first by 1 point, and I think Nathan was ahead of me by 2 points, maybe 3. So it was still a pretty tight game. And I think that's why ultimately I did kind of enjoy the experience. I also saw there was a ton of expansions out for this. There was a big box edition. Maybe if I can find it for a fair price, I might like to check it out. But I am glad I got to try out Alhambra. And that is all the recently played games. Now, let me real quick get us into question of the week for next week, and I want to have some fun with this one. Guess what? This Thursday, May 29th, is my birthday. So I want to tailor question of the week around that. If you could get any game, let me actually put it this way. If someone offered you to get you any game that you have ever wanted, regardless of price or availability, if they could find it and they were willing to pay any price, what game would you ask for? If you could just have any game as a gift, regardless of price or availability, what would you ask for? I'd love to find out. I have no idea what I'm going to pick. My wife and I actually chatting about this last night, in fact, and she goes, wait, this isn't like a hint to me, right? Like you're giving me 3 days to figure this out. No. But I think it'd be a cool idea. If you could get any game, what would it be? Folks, that is the end of episode number 61. Thank you as always for watching. Again, welcome to any of our first-time posters, and I'm looking forward to having more interaction going forward. So enjoy the week, and I will catch you folks again soon. Cheers.